Hello and welcome. This is lesson number 3. In lesson number 2 of my Agile Practices Guide course, we covered the values and principles of Agile. Now we are talking about practices. I have divided this topic into two parts. So, in part one, which is this lesson, we will be talking about Agile process flow. It is very important to get an end to end understanding before we deep dive into practices. So, we'll do that. You'll understand how Agile project management works, how the work is done, and then we will talk about within that we'll talk about Agile Teams, what is the structure. Then we'll talk about team workspaces because collaboration is very important in Agile. And then we will look at all the terms of Agile cycle, which includes practices. In the next lesson we will deep dive into each of the practices. So this is for your overview, your overall understanding of how to work in an Agile manner, how Agile project management is done. Before we started the Agile flow, I wanted to do a quick recap of this. This is what we covered in lesson number 2. This is how the pyramid looks like. On the bottom, you see values, which are core beliefs, principles, the guidelines driven by those core beliefs, and the practices is the real work. How is it done? So, we are talking about the top of the pyramid now, which is practices. Okay, so what you're seeing in front of you is agile work in one slide. Don't worry if you don't understand these terms in detail. How does it work? We will do that, we'll cover that. But it is very important for a learning and understanding point of view to visualize this flow in your mind. So, when we talk about each of these terms in detail, you will know where each of these items fit. Okay, so this is the agile process flow looks like. This is how the work is done. Okay, so you're seeing some roles like actors, which is your product owner and your agile team. You see some actions such as sprint planning, and then you're seeing this cycle. We will talk about it, what is happening inside, and you also see practices. Okay, let me just walk you through this. You will understand more, and then we will look into each of these practices. So, first of all, you have your customer slash product owner, because product owner is someone who is in charge of end to end value creation and they represent the customer. We'll talk about them later on. So, your product owner creates product backlog. Product backlog is list of all the features that your project needs to work on or develop. Then you have your agile team, they get the product backlog, and based on that they pick what they want to do in one sprint. Now these terms that you are seeing, I have used Scrum terminology, which is most common agile framework. They differ a little bit in all other practices, but the concepts are going to remain more or less the same. Okay, so what is a sprint? Sprint is the time box within which the team is going to develop certain features or work on certain tasks. So, sprint planning is based on the product backlog. So, say you have 20 features to be developed in as a part of an agile project. Okay, so that list of 20 features is your product backlog. Then from that 20, the team decided, okay, first, in our first time box, which is sprint, we are going to develop three of them. So those three come into your sprint planning. So that creates your sprint backlog. So there are two types of backlog: product backlog and sprint backlog. Backlog, don't get confused, is just another term for a to-do list. What do we need to do is your backlog. Once that backlog is created, the team gets uh, into a sprint, which is also called iteration, as you can see here. Okay, so gets into that, and then they do certain activities, which is daily scrum or stand-up meeting, sprint review meeting. These are all agile practices. Retrospective, most popular and most heard of is retrospective. And as a result of this work, they have a potentially shippable product or feature. So those three, they were chosen by the team out of the 20, and then they maybe create a meaningful outcome, which is a potentially shippable product. So this is how the work is done. This is the great mystery resolved. How is agile work done? You take a product backlog, you do sprint planning, you have sprint backlog, you do your work within that time box, and you have something to be delivered to your customer. Okay, now let's talk about each of these in detail. Okay, so you can keep looking back at this cycle when you're learning about these terms, so that flow will be clear in your mind and you'll understand more easily. All right. Okay, people are the most important part of project management. Okay, so let's talk about the people involved in an agile project. What are the roles? So first of all, you have product owner, which, like in traditional project management, you have sponsor. Same way, you have product owner who defines the vision and prioritizes work. It is very important. There will be questions in your exam about prioritizing the backlog. It is always the product owner who prioritizes the product backlog, who tells you what needs to be done first. You can enable them, you can facilitate the discussion as a scrum master or a project manager, but it is always them who decide. Okay, we'll talk about it more in detail later. So, Agile Project Manager is also called Scrum Master, facilitates the process and removes obstacles. So, the central of everything, managing everything, taking care of everyone's needs, what needs to be done to get the work done, and removing obstacles. We also call them blockers, impediments. Development team is your core project team who is actually going to deliver the work. Then you have stakeholders. You need other people who are not part of your core agile team, but you need their input, like subject matter experts, and you need their feedback, like customer. And then servant leader. Servant leader is, everybody can be a servant leader. Servant leader is a leader who does not dictate, who does not micromanage, but enables the team. It's a concept in Agile where the leader is serving the team so that they are enabled and empowered to do the work. Now you see a small part here, a bullet here: I shaped versus T shaped people in Agile. Now, what does that mean? Where did my cursor go? Yes. So I shaped people. I is straight and T is like this. Okay. So I shaped people mean people who are experts in one area, but they don't usually contribute outside their specialty. So they are expert in just one area. T shaped people who are experts in one area but also have a fair understanding or a working knowledge of other areas. In an agile context, T shaped people are more useful, for lack of a better word, add more value, because they can collaborate effectively across different functions. Okay, so suppose there is a team member who knows only one type of code, or who has only one skill. That team member cannot, once they are done with their work, they cannot collaborate with someone else, share insight with someone else, and if they are gone and nobody else knows that skill, the team is stuck. That problem is not there with T-shaped people. So Agile promotes T-shaped people, people having skills in more than one area and expertise in one area. Okay. Now let's talk about agile workspaces, because collaboration is one of the values and there are principles talking about it. So collaboration is important. Agile teams collaborate in shared workspaces. They have the possibility of interacting with each other whenever they want. Balance between open social areas and quiet spaces. They should have some time or space to think about their own work. However, it should also be possible for them to collaborate with each other. So there should be social areas. Now, in today's time and age, virtual teams are very rampant, it's very common. So there are two techniques for there are many, but these are the two techniques that we'll talk about from exam point of view. Virtual collaboration tools, we all know Teams and everything. However, there are two techniques, fishbowl window and remote pairing, that I want to talk about. In distributed teams, we need to be extra mindful of maintaining team cohesion, that the team is together. Two techniques that are useful for remote collaboration: one is fishbowl windows. This involves setting up long term video conferencing that links there are links that remain open throughout the day, so team members can join and leave as they need, similar to being in the physical space. So when you're in a physical office space, you're not constantly talking to someone, but whenever you have some idea or you have a query, you can quickly get up, go up to their desk and talk to them. So it's something to simulate that kind of working environment, which is your fishbowl window. Remote pairing is similar. It's using screen sharing tools. Teams can collaborate in real time, even across different locations. This setup can be almost as effective as face to face pairing, but you need to consider the time zones. There will be questions in your exam about teams distributed and in different time zones, and you have to find the best solution where everybody's time zone is respected and they are able to collaborate as well. Okay. Now we will talk about each of the terms that we saw in the cycle. We will explain them in detail. So the first one is product backlog. I already talked a little bit about it. What is a product backlog? It's a prioritized list of features, improvements, bug fixes, everything that the project needs to cover. It is managed by the product owner, it is created by the product owner, and it is prioritized also by the product owner. Now, what is sprint? Sprint is also called iteration, a time boxed period, usually 2 to 4 weeks, during which a scrum team works to complete a set of product backlog items. In Agile principles, if you remember, we talk about working in a time boxed fashion. So, this is the result of that principle, that the team works usually 15 days, which is 2 weeks, that okay, we will complete this much amount of work in these 15 days, and that is called a sprint. Now, what is sprint backlog? Product backlog. From that, we create sprint backlog. And we need to remember that agile teams tend to be empowered. So, product backlog is created by product owner, and then from that, the team pull mechanism of assigning, not assigning work, but taking on work. They pull, okay, these are the three items that we want to work. In this sprint, and how that planning is done, there are techniques, there are, we will talk about epics and stories and everything when we talk about agile planning, so hang on. Right now, what we are talking about is sprint backlog, the subset of items from the product backlog that the team commits to completing during a sprint. This also includes tasks necessary to deliver them. For example, if you want to, so for example, the team says that we will create the landing page for this website in this sprint. Now, all the back end tasks that are important or that are needed to have that outcome, that is also part of product backlog. So, everything that needs to be done to complete those three features out of 20 is your sprint backlog. Talking about product owner now, we have talked a lot about the product owner. Again, the person responsible for maximizing the value of the product by managing and prioritizing the product backlog. They represent stakeholders and customer, and by that it also means that their business needs, the requirements that are coming from the stakeholders and customer. Scrum Master is a project manager, the facilitator of the Scrum team, ensuring the team follows Scrum principles, Agile principles, and removing obstacles that prevent progress. So, that is the duty of a Scrum Master. Sprint planning. Sprint planning is the process which gives you the sprint backlog. So, meeting at the start of each, so 1 to 15 15 days suppose is your sprint. So in the beginning there will be a sprint planning meeting where the team discusses what will be done in the sprint and how they will do it. It results in sprint backlog. So you have the product backlog, the team sits together, does sprint planning, and then you have sprint backlog. It will be done in every sprint in the beginning of the sprint. Talking about sprint review now, a meeting held at the end, towards the end of the sprint, where the team presents the completed work to the product owner and stakeholders. There can be customers, there will mostly be customers also, because you need to gather feedback. So you will show them what you have done. You will gather feedback. That is your sprint review meeting. It's with the stakeholders, with the product owner and customers. All right. Then comes retrospective. So based on whatever happened during the sprint and the sprint review, retrospective is held. Retrospective is a meeting which is done after sprint review, where the scrum team reflects on what went well, what did we do good, what didn't go well, what were the problems, and how can they improve in the next sprint. That is your retrospective, which is looking back at your work to course correct, to do better in the next sprint. Now, what is product increment? It was not there in the cycle, but we'll talk about it when we talk about planning and all. Product increment is the usable product functionality completed during a sprint. Each increment builds upon previous one. If you remember in the flow, in the end we saw that there is a potentially shippable product after the sprint is done. So that builds your product increment, that okay, there were 20 features, 3 of them are done, so those 3 completed features are your product increment. It keeps on building after each iteration. I told you about the sprint backlog. Okay, so these are the 3 features that we need to complete, and these are the tasks that we need to do to complete those features. Everything, all of that is managed on a task board, Kanban boards. There are some digital versions. You have Trello, you have Asana, you have Microsoft Planner. There are so many task boards, Kanban boards. It basically is a representation of everything that needs to be done and the progress that the team is making. The standard columns are to do, in progress, and done, and sometimes there is an impediment or blocker column. There's a help needed column where they put items which are blocked for some reason, where some help is required. So it's a visual representation of the work in progress, often divided into columns such as to do, in progress, and done. That is your task board. Time boxing, we already talked about. Sprint, a fixed period allocated for a particular activity. Sprints, daily scrum, and sprint reviews are example of time boxed events in scrum. Whatever happens, whatever we saw in that circle are the events that take place in that time boxed period. Impediment, blockers. Okay, what are they? Anything that prevents the team from achieving their goal during a sprint, those are your impediments. The scrum master's role is to help resolve these impediments. This is all that we need to cover in this lesson. In the next lesson, we will continue talking about agile practices. We will do a deep dive into stand up, retrospective, and all other practices. So keep watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.